I once believed I knew my daughter better than anyone. For 30 years, I had been there for her, lifting her up when she stumbled, celebrating her victories, putting her needs ahead of my own. I thought I understood her completely, but life has a way of revealing truths we don't expect, and what I came to realize is that sometimes those we love the most are the ones who see us the least. My name is Margaret Wilson, and this is the story of how I discovered that being a good mother doesn't mean sacrificing your own identity, even when doing so might cost you everything. Let's take a moment to reflect. Where are you tuning in from? If my story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I'm sharing something that will speak to your soul. We often hear that retirement is meant to be the golden years, a time to finally focus on yourself after decades of putting others first. That was the dream I clung to during those long, exhausting night shifts at Denver Memorial Hospital, where I spent over 30 years as a nurse. My colleagues spoke of cruises they would take, hobbies they would pursue once they punched out for the last time. I simply wanted peace, perhaps a small garden, time to read the books, collecting dust on my nightstand. I'd saved every penny I could. Nothing extravagant, just a modest 401k, some stock investments James had set up before he passed away from cancer 15 years ago. Being a widow at 47 taught me lessons in self-reliance I never expected. I learned to manage finances, fix leaky faucets, and fill the silent spaces of an empty home with my own resilience. Yet, through it all, there was Olivia, my vibrant, tempestuous daughter, who was both the light of my life and a source of constant worry. She was always a dreamer, creative, passionate, but with a tendency to chase rainbows without considering the storms that often followed them. When she met Ethan in her junior year of college, I felt cautiously hopeful. He seemed stable, ambitious, a grounding force for my free-spirited daughter. They married young, just 3 months after graduation. I stood there, in that tiny chapel, tears streaming down my face, as Olivia walked down the aisle in a vintage dress, whispering to James's memory, "Our baby girl made it." The newlyweds moved to San Diego, where Ethan landed an entry-level job at a marketing firm, while Olivia taught art at a local elementary school. But the reality of California's high living costs hit them hard. Their first apartment was no bigger than a shoebox, with a view of a brick wall, and rent that made my stomach tighten with concern. During our weekly video calls, I noticed the strain in Olivia's face, the tension around her eyes, the way she nervously glanced around their cramped space. "Mom," she said one evening, her voice cracking slightly, "we're drowning here. Ethan's commute is killing him, and after rent and student loans, we can barely afford groceries." She wasn't asking directly, but I knew my daughter too well. I could read between the lines. That night, I found myself staring at my retirement portfolio. The rational part of me, the part that had been frugal and cautious for decades, urged me to stay the course. But the mother in me could not bear to see Olivia struggling when I had the means to help. The next morning, I transferred $10,000 into her account. I told myself it was just a one-time gift, a small boost to help them get on their feet. But one time turned into 2, then 3, and within a year, it had become a regular pattern. Every month, without fail, I transferred $1,000. It wasn't enough to solve all their problems, but it eased the pressure and brought back the smile to my daughter's face during our calls. "You're a lifesaver, Mom," Olivia would say. "We'll pay you back someday, I promise." And I didn't expect repayment. That's not what a mother's help is about. But what I did hope for was gratitude, or at least an acknowledgement of the sacrifices I was making. I continued to work part-time at an urgent care clinic, postponing my full retirement to maintain the extra cash flow. My own dreams, once again, had to be put on hold. And then came Noah, my first grandchild, a perfect blue-eyed boy with Olivia's dimples and a curious nature. The moment I held him, something fierce and protective awakened within me. I flew to San Diego every chance I got, spending my vacation days rocking him through colicky nights. preparing freezer meals, doing anything I could to make their lives easier. But at 8 months old, Olivia called, her voice shaking with tears. It was in this moment, amidst the sacrifices and struggles, that I realized the deeper lesson life had been trying to teach me. That true love and devotion don't always come in the form of giving until you have nothing left. Sometimes, the greatest love we can offer is the wisdom to know when to step back and allow others to stand on their own. Only then can they truly rise. This was the beginning of my journey, a journey that would teach me more than I could have ever imagined about self-worth, boundaries, and the power of self-love. Mom, we can't keep living like this. This apartment is too small. Now that we have Noah, there's mold in the bathroom, and I'm worried it will make him sick. The neighborhood isn't safe enough. We need to find somewhere better. I understood her concerns all too well. I had been in that apartment, felt the dampness in the walls, and heard the arguments that echoed from the neighbors above. I knew Noah deserved better. They all did. "What are you thinking, sweetheart?" I asked, already mentally calculating what I could afford to give. She spoke with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "We found a townhouse in a better neighborhood. It's perfect. A small yard for Noah. Good schools nearby." She hesitated. "The down payment, Hardy," she trailed off. The down payment was substantial. $75,000 for a modest 3-bedroom in a decent part of San Diego. It would require liquidating a significant portion of my retirement investments. My financial advisor, Gregory, practically begged me not to do it. "Margaret, this is the bulk of your security," he warned, his voice full of concern. "You're 62. These funds need to last potentially another 30 years. But what good is security if my daughter and grandson are suffering?" "Family comes first," I replied, the words automatic and rehearsed. Gregory sighed, shuffling the papers on his desk. "At least make it a loan. Draw paperwork. Establish terms." I waved away his concerns. "They're family, not clients. I trust my daughter." That trust cost me $75,000, withdrawn as a lump sum, with penalties that made me wince, but not waver. When I wired the money to Olivia and Ethan's account, the relief in my daughter's voice felt like payment enough, or so I told myself. They moved into the townhouse a month later. I flew out to help, spending 2 weeks unpacking boxes, hanging curtains, and assembling furniture. While Ethan worked long hours, and Olivia juggled Noah and her part-time teaching position, the house was lovely. Not extravagant, but clean, bright, with a small patch of grass where Noah could someday play. I took pictures of every room, especially the guest bedroom. They'd set it up with a comfortable pull-out sofa and a small desk. "This is your space," Olivia said, hugging me tightly. "Whenever you visit, Mom, you've given us so much. This home is your home too." Those words warmed me through many cold Colorado nights in the years that followed. I'd look at the photos of that guest room, my room, and feel connected to them despite the distance, even as I continued sending monthly support, now reduced to $1,000 as their careers slowly advanced. I consoled myself with the knowledge that I had a place in their lives, both figuratively and literally. Noah grew from a baby to a rambunctious toddler, and then to a kindergartner with a gap-toothed smile and endless questions about the world. I treasured our video calls where he'd show me art projects or practice reading simple books. 3 times a year, I'd make the trip to San Diego, each visit filling my heart in ways nothing else could. But during those visits, I noticed a subtle change in Ethan's attitude. What had once been warm gratitude began to cool into polite tolerance. He'd make comments under his breath about in-laws who overstay their welcome. Despite my careful efforts to be helpful without interfering, he'd disappear for work emergencies that seemed to coincide with family dinners or Noah's weekend activities. Olivia noticed it too. I'd catch her watching him with a tight expression, especially when he'd check out mentally during our conversations, absorbed in his phone, or making excuses to leave the room. "He's under a lot of pressure at work," she'd explain, though the explanation rang increasingly hollow. Last spring, during a rare moment alone, While Olivia took Noah to a playdate, Ethan cornered me in the kitchen. His voice was casual, but his eyes were cold, like winter's chill. "Margaret, I've been meaning to talk to you about the financial support." I tensed, the dishcloth frozen in my hands. "What about it?" "Don't get me wrong," he said, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. "We appreciate everything you've done, but Noah's getting older. Our expenses are changing. And frankly, 1,000 a month isn't going as far as it used to." The presumption stunned me. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of expectation. We were thinking something closer to 2,000 would make more sense. As if my retirement fund were simply a resource they were entitled to access at will. I measured my response carefully. "Ethan, I'm on a fixed income now. The monthly support was always meant to be temporary, until you both got established." His expression hardened. "Established in this economy? Do you have any idea what it costs to raise a family in California? Private school applications, activities, healthcare, not to mention inflation." "I understand it's expensive," I said, keeping my voice level, "but I've already given a substantial amount." "You're her mother," he cut in, "and Noah's only grandmother. If you can't support your own family, what's even the point of all that money sitting in your accounts?" I felt something shift inside me, a hairline fracture in the foundation of my relationship with my son-in-law. But I swallowed my hurt and anger, not wanting to create tension during my limited time with Noah. In that moment, I was faced with a difficult truth. Love sometimes requires boundaries. It's not about the sacrifices we make, but about the recognition of when those sacrifices no longer serve the highest good, for ourselves or for those we love. Love, at its purest, requires wisdom. The wisdom to give, and the wisdom to say enough. The question now was, how would I choose to love myself and them in the days to come? Later that night, I transferred an extra $1,000 to their account, a peace offering, a demonstration of good faith, perhaps even an attempt to buy back the warmth that seemed to be seeping from our family bonds. When Olivia called 2 months later, with news that left me breathless, I was still nursing that wound. "Mom, oh my God, Mom!" Her voice bubbled through the phone. "Ethan proposed again. He wants us to renew our vows for our 10th anniversary." My confusion must have been evident in my silence, because she hurried to explain. "He's been planning it for months, a destination wedding in Cancun. Just immediate family and our closest friends. Isn't it romantic? He says we deserve a real wedding, not the rushed ceremony we had when we were broke students." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "That sounds expensive, sweetheart." "Well, yes," she admitted, voice dipping slightly, before rebounding with enthusiasm. "But Ethan says, we've worked so hard we deserve something special. The resort is gorgeous. Private beach, multiple pools, 5 restaurants. We're booking 20 rooms for a week in June. 20 rooms for a week in Cancun." I echoed faintly. "Olivia, that must cost." "Don't worry about the cost," she interrupted. "We're handling it. I'm calling because we want you to be there. Of course, you'll need to book flights soon to get the best rate. I'm emailing you all the details." That night I couldn't sleep. Something felt off, a dissonance I couldn't quite name. Ethan, who had just pressed me for additional financial support, was suddenly funding a luxury destination wedding. It didn't add up. My nurse's instinct, the one that had helped me identify when patients weren't telling the complete truth about their symptoms, was sending up flares. The next morning I called my bank. The customer service representative was friendly and efficient as she reviewed my accounts. "Everything looks good, Ms. Wilson. Although I do see a significant withdrawal 2 weeks ago. That was a bit unusual for your pattern. Did you authorize a transfer of $35,000 to an external account?" The room tilted sideways. "I'm sorry, what?" "A wire transfer on the 14th to an account under the names Olivia and Ethan Parker. I assume that's your daughter and son-in-law." My mouth went dry. "I didn't authorize that transfer." What followed was a blur of security questions, formal disputes, and increasingly panicked Phone calls. The transfer had been initiated online using my credentials. The bank's investigation revealed the login had occurred from San Diego, not Colorado. During my most recent visit, they had taken my money $35,000, nearly a third of what remained, in my retirement fund without my knowledge or permission. I used my own computer or phone while I was staying with them, perhaps while I was sleeping, or showering, or playing with Noah in the backyard. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that at first I couldn't process it. When I finally gathered the courage to call Olivia, my hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the phone. "Mom, I was just about to call you. Did you get the email with the resort information? We need to confirm your room preferences by Friday." Her voice was light, buoyant with excitement. "Olivia," I said, my voice strangely calm, despite the storm raging inside me. "I need to ask you something important, and I need you to tell me the truth. Did you or Ethan transfer money from my accounts without my permission?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "Mom," she finally said, her voice small, defensive, "it's not what you think we were going to tell you. Tell me what that you stole from me." "We didn't steal. We borrowed for the vow renewal. It's for our family, for all of us to have this amazing experience together. You're always saying how important family is, how you do anything for us. Borrowing involves asking permission. Olivia, it involves discussion, consent. What you did was theft. That's a horrible thing to say. After everything we've been through together, Mom, you know, we'll pay you back. Ethan's up for a promotion. And once that comes through, stop." The word came out sharper than I intended, but it cut through her excuses. "I've contacted the bank. I've filed a fraud report." Another silence. This one, electric with shock. "You what, Mom? You can't be serious. They'll investigate us. There could be legal consequences." "Yes," I said quietly. "There could be, but we're your family. How could you do this to us? To Noah, you'd risk his father having a criminal record over a misunderstanding." Her words were designed to wound, to activate my grandmother's heart, to make me back down. They might have worked once, but something had fundamentally changed, not just in our relationship, but in me. "I've already told the bank. I don't want to press charges," I said. "But the money needs to be returned. Olivia, all of it. The wedding or vow, renewal, whatever you want to call it, needs to be canceled. Canceled. Mom, we can't. The deposits are non-refundable, and everyone has already booked flights. I'm not canceling my wedding 'cause you're suddenly being stingy. This isn't about being stingy. This is about respect, about boundaries, about trust that's been broken. If you're so worried about the money, fine. Keep your $1,000 a month. We'll manage without your help." The irony of her statement, acting as if continuing to give them money was something I was imposing on them, rather than a sacrifice I'd been making, might have been comical if it wasn't so painful. "This conversation isn't productive right now," I said, exhaustion settling into my bones. "We both need time to think. I love you, Olivia. That hasn't changed. What happens next depends on your choices, not mine." I hung up and sat in the quiet of my living room, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon, sunlight streaming through the window. The peace I'd expected in retirement had proven elusive, but perhaps it had been within me all along, waiting for me to stand up for myself, to recognize my own worth beyond what I could provide to others. The next morning, my phone exploded with notifications. Texts from Olivia, increasingly frantic voicemails from Ethan, alternating between attempts at charm and thinly veiled threats about cutting me off from Noah. If I continued this ridiculous crusade, messages from numbers I didn't recognize, friends of theirs I assumed, recruited to pressure me into backing down. I responded to none of them. Instead, I drove to my local bank branch and met with the manager, a Kindy woman named Teresa, who had handled my accounts for years. I'd like to move my remaining funds to new accounts, I told her, and I need to ensure no one but me has access. No electronic transfers without my physical presence and eyed verification. Teresa nodded, understanding in her eyes. Family financial situations can be complicated. We'll make sure you're protected, Margaret. That afternoon, I received an email from the resort in Cancun. The vow renewal celebration had been canceled. All deposits had been returned to the original form of payment, my credit card, which they had also apparently used. Without my knowledge, the realization should have brought relief, but instead it hollowed me out. How long had this been happening? What else didn't I know? 3 days of silence followed. I spent them in my garden planting the tomato seedlings I'd been nurturing on my kitchen windowsill. There was something therapeutic about digging my hands into soil, about participating in creation, rather than consumption, about setting boundaries this far and no farther, even if only with wooden stakes and twine. When my phone rang on the 4th day, I almost didn't answer, but something, intuition perhaps, or simple exhaustion with the weight of unresolved conflict, made me pick up Mom. Olivia's voice was rough, as if she'd been crying. "Can we talk? Really talk this time?" We met at a coffee shop halfway between our homes, a 6-hour drive for each of us to a neutral location in Utah, where neither of us could easily storm off. I arrived first, claiming a quiet table in the corner. When Olivia walked in, the sight of her hit me with physical force. She looked smaller, somehow diminished. Her eyes were shadowed, her usually styled hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. "Where's Noah?" I asked as she slid into the seat across from me. "With my friend Jenna." "I came alone." She fiddled with a sugar packet, not meeting my eyes. "Ethan doesn't know I'm here." "I see." I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. "I've left him." She finally said the words, tumbling out in a rush, or at least I think I have. "I packed some bags, took Noah, and we're staying with Jennifer now. I don't know if it's permanent, but I needed space to think." I nodded, careful to keep my expression neutral, despite the surge of conflicting emotions. "What prompted this after you discovered the transfer? After you canceled the vow renewal?" "Ethan was," she hesitated, searching for words. "He was a different kid, just a different person. Cruel, calculating. He told me it had been his idea all along to borrow from your accounts, that he'd been doing it for years in smaller amounts." My stomach clenched. "Years?" She nodded miserably. "Apparently ever since we moved into the townhouse. Never enough to raise flags. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. He said you'd never notice that you owed us for raising your only grandchild and keeping him close enough for visits." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. All those times I'd checked my accounts and thought I'd spent more than I remembered. All those unexplained discrepancies I'd attributed to poor memory or careless record. Keeping the vow renewal was his idea, too, she continued, tears welling in her eyes. But not for the reasons he told me, not because he wanted to celebrate our marriage. It was for appearances, to impress his boss and colleagues, to create social media content, to present an image of success we haven't earned. When you canceled it, when the money was returned, he was furious, not sad, not disappointed, furious that his plan had failed. She looked up at me, then really looked at me. For what felt like the first time in years, I started thinking about everything. How we've been living beyond our means, how we've been treating you, how he's gradually isolated me from my friends, my colleagues, anyone who might question our lifestyle or his decisions. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold, trembling slightly beneath my fingers. "I'm not here to ask for money," she said quickly. "I swear I'm not. I just thought I needed to tell you, I'm sorry. I needed you to know that even though I participated, even though I looked the other way, I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to become this person." We talked for hours, the coffees growing cold between us as we peeled back layers of resentment, expectation, and misunderstanding. I learned how Ethan had systematically convinced Olivia that they deserved more than they had. That taking from me was justified because I'd just waste the money on gardening supplies and book club novels. How he'd framed every request, every intrusion, is something I would want, as a way for me to fulfill my purpose as a mother and grandmother. And I shared my own culpability, how I'd enabled dependency, how I'd substituted financial support for the harder work of honest communication. how I'd allowed my identity to be subsumed by their needs because it was easier than figuring out who Margaret Wilson was beyond being Olivia's mother. "What happens now?" she asked as the cafe began to empty around us the afternoon, stretching toward evening. "Now," I said gently, "we both start over, not from scratch. We have too much history for that, but from truth, from respect." I didn't offer her money. She didn't ask for it. Instead, I offered something that had been missing from our relationship for too long. Boundaries with love, support with expectations, generosity with respect. Olivia found an apartment near Jenna's place. It's small but clean, with bunk beds for Noah in the second bedroom, and a pull-out couch in the living room, where I stayed during my first visit. 6 weeks later, she got a full-time teaching position at a public school, arranged affordable child care with another teacher's mother, and filed for legal separation from Ethan. The road hasn't been smooth. There are days when I still feel the pull of old patterns, the instinct to solve, to fix, to sacrifice. There are nights when I wake up wondering if I've been too harsh, if I've damaged our relationship beyond repair. Then I remember the look in Olivia's eyes that day in the cafe. Clear, present adult, and I recommit to this new way of loving. Last month, Olivia called with news that made my heart skip. "Mom, I've been putting aside a little each paycheck. It's not much yet, nowhere near what was taken, but I wanted you to know I'm committed to paying back every cent. Not because you're demanding it, but because it's right. I respect you not just as my mother, but as a person with your own life and needs." I told her to keep the money and savings to establish her own security first. "We'll figure out the rest together," I promised, "and we will on new terms with clear eyes." As for me, I finally planted those tomatoes, and I joined a travel group for active seniors. We're planning a trip to the Grand Canyon next spring. My house is quieter than it used to be, but the silence no longer aches. It's peaceful, purposeful. The quiet of a woman who has learned, perhaps later than she should have, that loving others begins with respecting yourself. Noah still visits regularly. During his last day, he helped me build a small bench for my garden, his first real woodworking project. As we sanded the edges together, he looked up with those serious blue eyes and asked, "Grandma, are you still sad about the money?" Children miss nothing. Even at 7, he had absorbed the tension, the drama, the shifting family dynamics. "No, sweetheart," I told him truthfully. "I'm not sad about the money anymore. Some lessons cost more than others. That's all." He nodded, wise beyond his years. "Mom says sometimes we have to fall down really hard to learn how to stand up better," out of the mouths of babes. My daughter was learning, growing, finding her strength, not despite our painful confrontation, but because of it, and in helping her learn to stand on her own. I had finally found my own footing as well. They say retirement should be golden years, a time to finally put yourself first after decades of caring for others. Looking out at my garden, at the life I'm building for myself day by day, I think perhaps they're right, but in something deeper, something earned through difficult choices and painful growth. Sometimes the most precious gift we can give our children isn't financial security or unwavering support. Sometimes it's the example of a woman who knows her own worth, who sets healthy boundaries, who loves fiercely but wisely. A woman who understands that no can be an act of love, just as profound as any sacrifice. That's the legacy I hope to leave. Olivia and Noah. Not a hefty inheritance, but a blueprint for living with dignity, courage, and self-respect. Because in the end, that's worth more than any destination wedding could ever be. When Noah turned 8, Olivia called with news that sent a subtle ripple of unease through my otherwise placid life. "Mom, Ethan's been promoted. They're making him regional marketing director for the West Coast territories." Her voice bubbled with excitement through the phone, the words tumbling over each other in that breathless way she had. Whenever big changes were on the horizon, it means more travel, more responsibility, but the salary bump is substantial. "We're thinking of upgrading to a larger home, maybe in Torrey Highlands." I was slicing bell peppers for dinner as we spoke, the knife pausing mid-cut, That's wonderful news, sweetheart. But Torrey Highlands, that's one of the most expensive neighborhoods in San Diego, isn't it? Well, yes, she admitted, her tone shifting slightly. But Ethan says with his new position, image matters. His colleagues all live in upscale areas, and there will be business dinners, networking events. You know how it is. I didn't know, actually. In my world of nursing and practical Colorado living, appearance had always taken a backseat to substance. But I swallowed my reservations. I'm sure you've thought it through carefully. We have, she assured me, then hesitated actually. That's partly why I'm recalling the down payment. Even with Ethan's raise, we'd be stretching ourselves thin. I was wondering if maybe you could help just to bridge the gap. We'd pay you back once the bonus comes through next quarter. The knife resumed its rhythm against the cutting board, perhaps with slightly more force than necessary. How much are we talking about, Olivia? Just 50,000, she said, casually, as if requesting pocket change. I know it sounds like a lot, but property values in San Diego are skyrocketing. It's actually an investment, Mom. In 5 years, that house could be worth 30% more. My chest tightened. $50,000 would deplete nearly half of what remained in my retirement accounts. After years of supporting them, Gregory's warnings echoed in my mind. The calculations showing how long my money needed to last. The cautionary tales of seniors outliving their savings. I need to think about this, Olivia. That's a significant amount. Of course, she said quickly. Take your time. But if you could let us know by next week, the sellers have another offer pending, and we don't want to lose out. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, the half-prepared dinner forgotten. Something felt different about this request, more presumptuous, less grateful. The monthly support I'd been providing had gradually increased to $1,500. Again, despite Ethan's steady career progression each time, I gently suggested scaling back. There was always a reason why they couldn't manage Noah's private school tuition. The unexpected roof repair, the extracurricular activities that were essential for his development. I called my brother Richard that evening, something I rarely did when it came to financial matters. He'd always been the pragmatic one in our family, sometimes brutally. So Maggie, he said after I explained the situation, you're being taken advantage of. You realize that, right? They're family rich, they've hit some rough patches. That's all, rough patches don't last 8 years. They certainly don't include buying houses in exclusive neighborhoods. When was the last time Olivia asked how you were doing? Whether you had enough for your own needs? His question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of discomfort through me. When had Olivia last shown interest in my life beyond perfunctory questions about my garden or book club? When had she considered the source of the money that flowed so freely into her household? I'm not saying cut them off. Richard continued, his voice gentler. Now I'm saying establish some boundaries. Make this a loan with clear terms, not a gift. See how they respond. It'll tell you everything you need to know about their intentions. I didn't sleep well that night, or the next. By the time Sunday arrived, I'd made my decision. I called Olivia back and took a deep breath before speaking. I've thought about your request, and I can help, but not with a gift. I'm willing to provide a loan of $30,000 with modest interest and a formal repayment plan. Once Ethan's bonus comes through, the silence on the other end stretched long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. Finally, Olivia spoke, her voice tight. A loan with interest. Mom, we're not strangers applying for a mortgage. We're your family. Yes, you are. I agreed calmly, which is why I want to be clear about expectations. The money needs to be repaid so I can maintain my own security. I can't believe you're suddenly being so transactional about this after everything we've been through together. Is this Richard's influence? It sounds like him. I bristled at her attempt to deflect. This is my decision, Olivia. I've supported you and your family generously for years. I'm not refusing to help now. I'm simply defining terms that protect everyone's interests. Protect your interests. You mean, she snapped. Fine. I'll tell Ethan he's not going to be happy. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. despite the knot in my stomach. The offer stands. If you want it, just let me know. She hung up. Without saying goodbye, I placed my phone on the coffee table and sat in the silence of my living room, a strange mixture of guilt and relief washing over me. For the first time in years, I had set a boundary with my daughter. A small one perhaps, but a boundary nonetheless. It felt foreign and uncomfortable, like shoes, a half size too small. 3 days later, Ethan called. His tone was conciliatory, almost jovial, as if the tense conversation with Olivia had never happened. "Margaret, how are you? It's been too long since we really caught up." His voice oozed charm, and I found myself automatically smiling despite my reservations. "Olivia mentioned you two discussed some financial arrangements for our house hunt." "Yes, we did. Look, I think there might have been some miscommunication. We completely understand your position alone. Makes perfect sense. Very responsible, very fair. I've actually drawn up some paperwork." He chuckled warmly. "Once an accountant's son, always an accountant's son, right? I like everything spelled out clearly." His easy capitulation caught me off guard. I'd been bracing for resistance, for emotional manipulation. "That's great, Ethan. I'm glad we're on the same page." "Absolutely. Family supporting family. That's what it's all about. I'll email you the documents today." "We're so grateful, Margaret. Truly." The loan papers arrived in my inbox that afternoon. They were professionally drafted with terms more favorable than I would have specified myself. A modest 2% interest rate. Repayment to begin in 6 months, with the full amount to be repaid within 3 years. I signed them feeling tentative pride in the mature resolution we'd reached. 2 weeks later, they closed on a house in Torrey Highlands. Not the one they'd initially mentioned, but an even more impressive property with a pool, expansive backyard, and guest house. The purchase price, according to the real estate listing I found online, was $1. $2 million. "How did you manage the down payment?" I asked Olivia during our next video call, trying to keep my tone conversational. Despite the alarm bells ringing in my head, $30,000 wouldn't have covered even a quarter of what they would have needed. "Oh, Ethan's parents pitched in," she said casually, panning the camera around to show me the vaulted ceilings and open-concept kitchen. "They've been wanting to help us upgrade for ages. They gave us furniture from their vacation home for the guest rooms." "Isn't it all gorgeous?" I murmured appropriate admiration, while a cold feeling settled in my stomach. Ethan's parents, as far as I knew, were comfortably middle class, but nowhere near wealthy. His father, a retired high school teacher, his mother, a part-time bookkeeper. They lived in a modest ranch-style home in Arizona and drove sensible older model cars. The idea that they had suddenly produced hundreds of thousands of dollars for a luxury home purchase seemed improbable at best. A week later, the first payment from the loan was deposited into my account, right on schedule. Then the second and the third, each one arriving promptly, exactly as agreed. My suspicions began to ease, replaced by a sheepish guilt for having doubted their intentions. Perhaps Richard had been wrong. Perhaps I had been too quick to assume the worst. That summer I flew out to San Diego for Noah's 9th birthday. The new house was even more impressive in person. Professionally decorated with art pieces that looked expensive and custom furnishings throughout. Ethan drove a new luxury SUV. Olivia had quit her teaching job to focus on managing the household and pursuing a nebulous career in interior design that seemed to involve a lot of lunches with potential clients, but few actual projects. "The EA guest house is all yours whenever you visit Mom," Olivia told me, showing me the charming one-bedroom cottage at the back of the property. "We've set it up, especially for you. See your favorite reading chair type, books we know you'd enjoy, even those lavender toiletries you love." I was touched by the thoughtfulness, by the tangible proof that I still held an important place in their lives, despite our recent tension. The weekend was filled with poolside relaxation. A lavish birthday party for Noah, with what seemed like dozens of his friends and dinners at restaurants, where the bill for a single meal exceeded what I typically spent on groceries for a week. It was during one of these dinners that Ethan, expansive from several glasses of expensive wine, began talking about their future plans. "We're thinking of buying a boat," he announced, signaling the waiter for another bottle. "Nothing extravagant, just a little something for weekend trips to Catalina. Noah's at the perfect age to learn sailing." I raised an eyebrow, unable to stop myself. "A boat is a significant expense. Are you sure it's the right time with the new house and everything?" Ethan's smile dimmed slightly. "Margaret, you worry too much. Life's about experiences creating memories. Noah only gets one childhood." "Besides," Olivia added, "we're managing our finances just fine. The loan payments to you are always on time, aren't they?" I nodded, acknowledging the point while still feeling uneasy about their apparent lifestyle. Inflation. Throughout the weekend, I noticed other signs of lavish spending. Designer clothes, with tags still attached in Olivia's closet, the latest gaming system for Noah, with dozens of games, a wine cellar being installed in the basement. On my last evening there, while Olivia was putting Noah to bed, Ethan cornered me in the kitchen. His expression was serious, his voice lowered. "I wanted to talk to you privately, Margaret, about our financial arrangement." My guard immediately went up. "What about it?" "We are incredibly grateful for your help with the down payment." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed casually. "But I've been thinking you're family, not a bank. The interest payment seems so formal, don't you think? Given everything you've done for us and everything we do to make sure you're part of Noah's life." The implicit transaction in his words made something twist uncomfortably in my chest. The terms were clearly established, Ethan. We all agreed. Of course, he waved a hand dismissively. "Just something to consider after all. That money will ultimately benefit Noah someday, won't it? Your legacy, your grandson's future, it's all connected." Before I could respond, Olivia returned, and the conversation shifted to safer topics. But Ethan's words lingered, leaving a sour taste that persisted long after I returned to Colorado. The next loan payment was late, not significantly, just a week past due, but it marked the first deviation from our agreement. When I gently inquired, Olivia apologized profusely, citing a banking error that had been resolved the following months. Payment arrived on time, reinforcing the explanation. But 3 months later, the pattern began again. A payment would be late, accompanied by a plausible excuse. Then several on-time payments would follow, lulling me into a false sense of security before the cycle repeated. It was subtle enough. I began to doubt my own concerns, wondering if I was being unnecessarily rigid about deadlines. Meanwhile, my monthly support continued uninterrupted, now transferred automatically from my account to theirs, on the first of each month when I suggested reducing the amount, pointing out that their financial situation had significantly improved with Ethan's promotion. I was met with elaborate explanations about increased expenses, the competitive educational landscape for Noah, and the importance of maintaining certain appearances for Ethan's career advancement. It was Richard who finally forced me to confront what was happening. During his annual visit to my home in Colorado, he noticed the meticulous ledger where I tracked incoming loan payments and outgoing support. "Maggie," he said, reviewing the inconsistent pattern of repayments, "this isn't about banking errors or timing issues. They're testing your boundaries, seeing what they can get away with." That's a harsh assessment. I protested, though a part of me wondered if he might be right. He fixed me with the direct stare that had both comforted and intimidated me since childhood. "Call your bank. Ask for a complete transaction history for the past year. See where your money is really going." I followed his advice the next morning, requesting detailed statements going back 18 months. What I discovered sent shockwaves through my carefully constructed understanding of my relationship with Olivia and Ethan. The monthly support I provided was being immediately transferred to a separate account, not their household account for bills and living expenses, as I'd assumed, but what appeared to be an investment account. More disturbing were a series of small withdrawals from my accounts that I hadn't authorized: $200 here, $500 there, sometimes as much as $1,000, all conducted online. Someone had access to my banking credentials. Someone had been systematically siphoning funds beyond what I'd knowingly provided. I felt physically ill, my hands shaking as I spread the statements across my kitchen table. The evidence was undeniable, yet my mind scrambled for alternative explanations. A bank error, a misunderstanding, identity theft by an unknown third party. But the timing of the unauthorized transactions told a different story. Many occurred during or immediately after my visits to San Diego, when my laptop or phone would have been accessible in their home. Others aligned with times when Olivia had asked to use my computer to check something quickly during her visits to Colorado. The violation went beyond financial. It was a breach of trust so fundamental that I struggled to process it. These weren't strangers or distant relatives. This was my daughter, my grandson's parents, the people I'd sacrificed for, supported, loved unconditionally. I didn't confront them immediately. Instead, I secured my accounts, changing all passwords and requiring two-factor authentication for any transactions. I filed a report with the bank's fraud department, though I couldn't bring myself to formally accuse my own family, and I began quietly gathering information, reviewing credit card statements, tracking the timing of their major purchases against unexplained withdrawals from my accounts. The pattern that emerged was damning. The luxury SUV Ethan now drove, purchased 3 days after a $5,000 unauthorized withdrawal from my retirement account. The professional landscaping for their new backyard coincided with a series of smaller withdrawals, totaling nearly $8,000. Even Noah's extravagant birthday party showed signs of being partially funded through money taken from my accounts without permission. What haunted me most wasn't just the theft, it was the calculation behind it. The systematic way they'd exploited my trust, the careful calibration of taking enough to fund their lifestyle enhancements, but not so much that I would immediately notice. It suggested not a moment of weakness or desperation, but a sustained campaign of deception. I stopped sleeping through the night. Food lost its taste. My garden, usually my sanctuary, felt like another burden, one more living thing depending on me for sustenance. During my volunteer shifts at the community center, colleagues commented on my distraction, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I sometimes froze mid-sentence as another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "Are you ill, Margaret?" my friend Eleanor asked, after I dropped a stack of folders for the third time that morning. "You don't seem yourself lately, just tired," I replied automatically. Nothing to worry about. But there was plenty to worry about beyond the immediate betrayal. Lay deeper questions that scratched at my consciousness like thorns. How long had this been happening? Had our entire relationship devolved into a transactional exchange where my value was measured solely by what I could provide? Had I enabled this by being too generous, too available, too willing to prioritize their needs above my own most painful of all? Did they love me at all, or merely the resources I represented? I might have continued in this limbo of knowledge without confrontation, indefinitely paralyzed by the fear of what a direct accusation would do to our family relationships. But then came the Thanksgiving invitation that forced my hand. "Mom, we're planning something special this year," Olivia announced during our weekly video call, a proper family Thanksgiving at the house. "We're inviting Ethan's parents, his sister and her family, a few close friends. Noah's so excited to have everyone together." I nodded, attempting a smile, while wondering how much of this gathering would be financed through my unknowing contributions. "We want you to come out a week early," she continued, "to help with preparations, but also we have something important to discuss with you." "Something exciting." Her tone set off alarm bells. "What kind of exciting news? We can't really talk about it over the phone. It's a family matter, a proposal we think will benefit everyone." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Let's just say it involves the future planning ahead, making sure everyone's needs are met in the best possible way." The vague description, combined with everything I now knew about their financial manipulations, cemented my suspicions. This wasn't about a family gathering. This was about access to my remaining assets, perhaps a pitch for moving me to San Diego permanently, where they could more directly manage my finances. Or worse, some scheme to have me invest in a business venture or property that would primarily benefit them, while being framed as securing my future care. That night I sat at my kitchen table, with a legal pad methodically listing every unauthorized withdrawal I'd identified. The total made me physically recoil: $63,740 over 18 months, not including the legitimate support I'd knowingly provided or the loan for the house down payment. It was a staggering sum money that represented years of careful saving over time shifts with aching feet, sacrificed vacations, and delayed dreams. In that moment, something crystallized within me, a clarity that cut through the fog of doubt and emotional manipulation. This wasn't about money, not really. It was about respect, about honesty, about whether I would continue to accept being valued only for what I could provide rather than who I was. I picked up my phone and composed a text message. To Olivia. I need to postpone my Thanksgiving visit. Something important has come up. I'll call you this weekend to discuss. Her response was immediate concern. Is everything okay? Are you sick? Do you need us to come to you? The irony of her apparent worry wasn't lost on me. Concern for my well-being. Now, with access to my presence, and presumably my finances was at risk, I'm fine. I replied simply, just need to sort some things out before traveling. We'll explain. Later that weekend, I drove to a small coffee shop, 2 towns over neutral territory, where I could make the call I'd been dreading without the comfort of familiar surroundings to weaken resolve. I ordered a tea I didn't drink and sat in a corner booth, rehearsing the words. One final time before dialing, Olivia answered on the second ring, her voice warm but edged with curiosity. Mom, is everything all right? We've been worried. I need to ask you something important, I said, skipping the pleasantries, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, she replied. I detected a new weariness in her tone. What is it? Have you or Ethan been accessing my accounts without my knowledge? Taking money beyond what I've explicitly given you? The silence that followed was different from any pause in our previous conversations. It wasn't contemplative or confused. It was calculating, the silence of someone rapidly assessing options, weighing denials against admissions, determining the extent of what I might already know. Mom, she finally said, her voice shifting into a defensive register. I recognized all too. Well, what are you talking about? Why would you ask something like that? Because I have bank statements, Olivia. I have dates, amounts, and patterns that align perfectly with your visits and major purchases. I know what's been happening, and I need to hear you acknowledge it. Another silence, this one briefer. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. Explain to me how thousands of dollars moved from my accounts to yours without my authorization. We borrowed sometimes when things were tight. We were always going to pay it back. It wasn't stealing, Mom. It was family helping family. Her voice cracked slightly, a tremor of emotion that might once have softened my resolve. You've always said you wanted to help us give Noah the best life possible. Borrowing involves permission, Olivia. It involves honesty, transparency, respect. What you did was none of those things. I know it looks bad, she conceded, but Ethan had a system. He was tracking everything. The plan was to repay it all with interest. Once his year-end bonus comes through, we just needed to bridge some gaps temporarily. The casual way she framed systematic theft as a mere timing issue, as if the fundamental violation of trust was a technicality rather than the core issue, cemented my decision. I'm canceling my Thanksgiving visit, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm also stopping all financial support, effective immediately, and I expect full repayment of the YA unauthorized withdrawals within 30 days. Mom, Panic edged into her voice. Now you can't be serious. Thanksgiving is our family tradition. Noah is expecting you and the money. We can't possibly repay everything that quickly. Your cash flow problems are not my responsibility. Olivia, not anymore. You and Ethan made choices. Choices to take without asking. Choices to lie. Choices to exploit my trust. Now you can deal with the consequences of those choices. This is insane. Over a misunderstanding about money, you'd throw away your relationship with your only daughter, your only grandchild, over something so materialistic. The attempted manipulation was so transparent, it almost made me laugh. This isn't about the money, it's about the deception. It's about the disrespect, and it's certainly not about throwing away relationships. It's about redefining them based on honesty rather than exploitation. I could hear muffled voices on her end. Ethan, presumably, asking what was happening then. He was on the line, his charm offensive, in full deployment. Margaret, please. There's been a huge misunderstanding. If you'll just come for Thanksgiving as planned, we can sit down together and explain everything. We've been under tremendous pressure with the new position, the social obligations. We made some poor decisions, absolutely, but our intentions were good. My decision is final, I replied, feeling a strange, calm settle over me. No visits, no financial support, full repayment expected. If you want to rebuild trust, that's where we start. And if we can't repay everything immediately, his voice hardened, the charming facade cracking. What then? Will you sue your own family? Take us to court? Have you thought about what that would do to Noah? The veiled threat, using my love for my grandson as leverage, confirmed every suspicion, erased every doubt. I've already consulted an attorney, I said, which wasn't strictly true, but seemed prudent given his response. I sincerely hope it doesn't come to legal action, Ethan, but I'm done being manipulated, and I'm done being used as your personal ATM. I hung up before he could respond, placed my phone face down on the table, and finally took a sip of my now cold tea. My hands were steady, my breathing regular. The confrontation I'd dreaded for weeks was over, and I felt not happy, certainly not triumphant, but unburdened, as if I'd set down a weight I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten. It wasn't actually part of me. Outside the coffee shop, late autumn sunlight filtered through bare branches, casting dappled shadows across the parking lot. I stood for a moment, face tilted toward the warmth, and allowed myself to imagine a future reclaimed, one where my worth wasn't measured in dollars, given where love didn't come with invoices attached, where my golden years truly belonged to me. It wouldn't be easy. There would be more difficult conversations, possibly legal battles, certainly emotional manipulation attempts. The path ahead would require strength I wasn't entirely sure I possessed, but as I drove home through the Colorado countryside, with mountains rising purple and steadfast against the horizon, I realized something profound. I'd rather face an uncertain future with integrity than continue living a comfortable lie. And for the first time in years, the road ahead felt like it might lead somewhere I actually wanted to go. The fallout was immediate, and precisely what I had expected. My phone exploded with notifications, texts, voicemails, even emails, all varying in tone from wounded indignation to barely concealed threats. I read at each message once, then filed them away in a special folder. I'd created evidence. My attorney had called it when I finally did consult one, 3 days after my confrontation with Olivia and Ethan. Caroline Weber was not what I had pictured. When I searched for legal representation, I had imagined someone older, perhaps stern and intimidating. Instead, I found myself sitting across from a woman in her early 40s, with bright eyes and a direct manner that somehow managed to be both compassionate and no nonsense. "Unfortunately, what you're describing is far from uncommon," she said, reviewing the documentation I'd meticulously organized. "Elder financial abuse often comes from family members, precisely because of the emotional leverage they have." "I'm not elderly," I protested automatically. "I'm C4." She smiled slightly. The legal definition is broader than you might think, but terminology aside, the situation is clear. Unauthorized access to your accounts constitutes fraud, regardless of family connections. She outlined my options with clinical precision. Civil litigation would be straightforward, given the evidence, but emotionally costly and public. A demand letter from her office might be sufficient to secure repayment without court involvement. Criminal charges were possible, but would have far-reaching consequences for Olivia and Ethan. What most clients in your position want isn't punishment. Caroline observed, watching me carefully. It's boundaries, restitution, and protection moving forward. Am I reading your situation correctly? I nodded, grateful for her insight. I don't want to destroy my daughter's life. I just want what's rightfully mine returned, and I want the exploitation to stop. Then let's start with a formal demand letter. Clear, professional, outlining exactly what occurred and what remedy you expect. Sometimes seeing their actions described in legal terms helps people understand the seriousness of what they've done. The letter was drafted, reviewed, and sent via certified mail within 48 hours. Caroline had suggested we start with a 30-day repayment window, firm enough to show I was serious, but reasonable enough to give them time to arrange finances. Meanwhile, I implemented every security measure. Caroline recommended new accounts at different banks, credit freezes, updated legal documents, clarifying my wishes regarding financial decisions. Should I become incapacitated, a thorough review of my will, which had previously left everything to Olivia and Noah. In simplistic terms, consider a trust. Instead, Caroline suggested it gives you more control over how and when assets are distributed. For instance, you might specify that Noah receives his portion for educational expenses, but not as a lump sum, until he's mature enough to manage it responsibly. Each step, I took each form, signed, each security measure implemented, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been gradually eroded. I had spent so many years defining myself primarily as Olivia's mother, measuring my worth by my usefulness to her and her family. Now I was redrawing those boundaries, not with anger, but with a calm determination that surprised even me. The first response to our legal letter came not from Ethan, as I had expected, but from Olivia. She arrived unannounced at my home on a Tuesday afternoon, her eyes red-rimmed, and her expression vacillating between contrition and defensive anger. A lawyer, Mom, really? You couldn't just talk to us directly. She stood on my porch, arms crossed, looking smaller and younger than I had seen her in years. I invited you to talk directly during our phone call. I reminded her, stepping aside to let her in. Despite my better judgment, you chose deception and manipulation instead of honesty. Inside, we sat in my living room, me in my favorite reading chair, her perched tensely on the edge of the sofa, as if ready to flee at any moment. The coffee I offered sat untouched on the table between us. Ethan's furious, she said finally. He says, "You've betrayed us. That family doesn't do this to family." Interesting perspective, I replied mildly. Does family steal from family? And his worldview, she flinched. It wasn't stealing. Not really. We were going to pay it all back when, how, you've been borrowing for years, Olivia. The debt has only grown. Your lifestyle has only become more extravagant. At what point was this magical repayment supposed to begin? She stared at her hands. You don't understand the pressure we're under. Ethan's position, the social expectations, Noah's school. We had to keep up appearances. No, I corrected gently. You chose to keep up appearances beyond your means, and you chose to finance that choice with money taken without permission from my retirement funds. Her eyes flashed with sudden anger. You've always been so judgmental about our lifestyle choices, so smug in your simple little life with your gardening and your book clubs. Not everyone wants to live like that, Mom. Some of us want more. The attack was so unexpected, so misaligned with reality, that for a moment, I could only stare at her in bewilderment. Was this how she had justified their actions to herself? by casting me as an adversary, a judgmental presence to rebel against, rather than a mother who had sacrificed to support her. Olivia, I said carefully, I have never judged your desire for a comfortable life. What I'm addressing is your methods of achieving it. There's nothing wrong with wanting nice things. There's everything wrong with taking what isn't yours to get them. We had no choice. The expenses kept piling up, and every time we tried to get ahead, something else would happen. The roof leak, Noah's emergency room visit for his asthma attack, the property tax increase. She was crying now, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. We were drowning, and yet you bought a boat, I pointed out quietly. And Ethan drives a luxury SUV. You quit your teaching job to pursue interior design without any clients. Those aren't the choices of people who are drowning, Olivia. They're the choices of people who feel entitled to more than they've earned. She wiped at her tears and angrily. So that's it. You're just cutting us off. What about Noah? He loves you, Mom. He asks about you every day since you canceled Thanksgiving. The mention of my grandson sent a pang through my chest, sharp and deep. I had been trying not to think about how much I missed him, how his absence left a hollow space in my life that nothing else could fill. But I recognized the emotional leverage for what it was. Noah will always be my grandson, and I will always love him, I said firmly, but I won't be manipulated through that love. Not anymore manipulated. She looked genuinely shocked. Is that what you think I'm doing? I'm telling you that your grandson misses you, and implying that if I want to see him, I need to drop the demand for repayment and resume financial support. I kept my voice level, though my heart was racing. That's manipulation. Olivia, using Noah as a bargaining chip in a financial dispute, she stood abruptly. This is pointless. You've obviously made up your mind, hired your attack dog lawyer, decided we're terrible people who deserve to be punished. I've decided I deserve to be treated with respect and honesty. I corrected the letter outlines a reasonable repayment plan that takes into account your financial situation. If you and Ethan are willing to take responsibility and make amends, we can begin rebuilding our relationship. And if we can't repay at all, what then? You'll take us to court, ruin Ethan's career. Maybe try to take Noah away from us. Her voice rose with each question, edged with hysteria. No one is talking about custody issues. Olivia, please don't catastrophize. We're talking about repaying money that was taken without permission. That's all. She shook her head, already moving toward the door. I never thought you'd turn on your own family like this over money of all things. Dad would be so disappointed in you. The invocation of James's memory. The implication that my late husband would side with dishonesty over integrity was the final straw. Something shifted inside me, a seismic realignment of maternal tolerance. Your father valued honesty. Above all else, I said, my voice quiet but firm. He would be heartbroken to see how you've twisted that value to justify taking advantage of my love for you. Don't you dare use his memory as a weapon against me. She froze, hand on the doorknob, her back to me for a moment. I thought she might turn around, might finally drop the defensive posturing and engage in an honest conversation. But then her shoulders stiffened, and she left without another word, the door closing behind her with a decisive click. I sat in the silence that followed, a curious, calm, settling over me. Despite the emotional turbulence of the confrontation, I had spoken my truth. I had maintained boundaries. I had refused to be manipulated through guilt or emotional blackmail. These were small victories, perhaps, but significant ones for a woman who had spent decades prioritizing peace over principle. When it came to family relationships, the next communication came via email 3 days later. Not from Olivia, but from Ethan. Gone was the charm offensive replaced by cold formality. Margaret, after reviewing your demands with our own legal counsel, we acknowledge the withdrawals from your accounts. While we maintain these were temporary measures during a period of financial transition, we recognize the lack of formal authorization. We are prepared to offer a settlement of $30,000, representing approximately half the amount claimed to be paid in monthly installments over 5 years. This is the maximum we can manage without significant hardship to our family, including Noah. Please have your attorney contact us to finalize terms. Regards, Ethan. I forwarded the email to Carolyn without comment. Her response came within the hour. Half the stolen amount stretched over 5 years, with no interest or acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Not acceptable. They're testing your resolve. How would you like to proceed? We decided on a measured escalation. Caroline drafted a response rejecting the offer, but expressing willingness to negotiate reasonable terms based on full repayment of the principal amount. We also requested financial documentation to substantiate their claimed inability to pay more quickly. If they're genuinely struggling, we can be flexible on the timeline, Caroline advised, but given their apparent lifestyle, I suspect they have more capacity to repay than they're admitting. She was right. After further legal pressure, revealed resources I hadn't known existed. A vacation timeshare in Cabo San Lucas investment accounts separate from their primary banking, and Ethan's executive compensation package that included substantial stock options. Their monthly expenses included country club dues, a wine subscription service, and a housekeeper who came 3 times weekly. They can absolutely afford to repay you within a year, Caroline confirmed after reviewing the documents. In fact, they could liquidate non-essential assets and clear the debt immediately if they chose to prioritize making things right. Armed with this knowledge, we pushed back firmly on their offer. The negotiation that followed was tense and protracted, conducted entirely through legal channels rather than direct communication. It was surreal to interact with my own daughter through such formal mechanisms, as if we were business adversaries rather than family. Eventually, we reached a settlement, full repayment of the $63,740 within 18 months, with modest interest and a structured payment schedule that accelerated as time went on. The agreement included consequences for missed payments and required them to provide updated financial information quarterly to ensure compliance. The first payment arrived exactly on schedule. A cashier's check for $500 delivered by certified mail with no accompanying note. I deposited it immediately, then sat in my car in the bank parking lot, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. The money represented validation of my stance, proof that I had been right to demand accountability, but it also symbolized a fundamental breakdown in the relationship I valued most in the world. For the first time since our confrontation, I allowed myself to cry deep, racking sobs that left me gasping for breath, my forehead pressed against the steering wheel. I mourned not just the current estrangement, but the revelation that our relationship had been compromised long before I discovered the financial deception. How long had Olivia seen me primarily as a resource rather than a person? When had Ethan's influence reshaped her values so dramatically? Had I enabled this transformation through my own eagerness to be needed? The questions had no satisfying answers, and eventually the tears subsided, leaving me hollow, but somehow cleaner, as if the grief had washed away some accumulated layer of self-deception. I started the car and drove home slowly, watching spring unfold around me, crocuses pushing through melting snow buds, swelling on tree branches, the world renewing itself. After winter's austerity at home, I found a small padded envelope in my mailbox addressed in unfamiliar childish handwriting. Inside was a somewhat crumpled homemade card, decorated with wobbly markers and excessive glitter to Grandma. I miss you. Love, Noah. Tucked inside the card was a Polaroid photo of Noah holding a school art project, a clay sculpture painted in vibrant colors that vaguely resembled a person. On the back of the photo he had written, "This is you in your garden." I got an A. The simple gift pierced straight through my carefully constructed emotional defenses. Noah was innocent in all this. A child caught between adult conflicts, missing his grandmother without understanding why she had suddenly disappeared from his life. The thought of him carefully addressing the envelope, perhaps secretly asking his school to mail it for him, made my throat tighten painfully. I called Caroline immediately. "I need to see my grandson. I said without preamble. The financial issues with Olivia and Ethan can't continue to separate me from Noah. He's not responsible for their actions. I agree completely, she replied. In fact, I was going to suggest we address visitation rights in our next communication. It's completely reasonable to maintain your grandparent relationship while the financial matters are being resolved with her guidance. I drafted a letter to Olivia and Ethan proposing regular visits with Noah, either at my home in Colorado or at a neutral location in San Diego. I specified that these visits would be focused solely on maintaining our relationship and would not involve discussion of the ongoing financial settlement. Their response was more positive than I had dared hope. Ethan, pragmatic, despite his resentment, recognized that further alienating me would serve no purpose. Now that legal agreements were in place, Olivia, according to the carefully worded email they sent, wanted Noah to maintain connections with extended family. The first visit was arranged for the following month, a weekend at a family-friendly hotel near San Diego's harbor, with Olivia dropping Noah off each morning and picking him up in the evenings. It wasn't the unstructured, intimate time we had shared in the past, but it was a start. I spent the weeks leading up to the visit in a state of nervous anticipation. Would Noah be distant influenced by whatever narrative Olivia and Ethan had constructed about my absence? Would the easy affection we had always shared be damaged by the months of separation? Had they told him anything about the conflict, shaped his perception of me in negative ways? When the day finally arrived, I was waiting in the hotel lobby 30 minutes early, obsessively straightening the small gift. I had brought him a beginner's gardening kit with seeds, miniature tools, and simple instructions for growing sunflowers in containers. I had debated endlessly about the appropriateness of a gift, not wanting to fall into patterns of buying affection, but ultimately decided that a thoughtful educational present that connected to our shared interests was different from the lavish indulgences that had characterized Olivia and Ethan's approach. Noah spotted me before I saw him, his excited shout cutting through the ambient noise of the hotel. "Grandma!" He broke free from Olivia's grasp and ran toward me, launching himself into my arms with such force that I nearly lost my balance. "My goodness, you've grown!" I exclaimed, holding him tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo and the indefinable essence that was uniquely. "Noah, I've missed you so much." "I missed you too. Why didn't you come for Thanksgiving?" "Mom said you were sick." "Then you didn't come for Christmas either, and I thought maybe you didn't want to see us anymore." His words tumbled out in a rush, his small face earnest and concerned over his shoulder. I met Olivia's gaze. She looked uncomfortable, but gave a small nod, tacitly acknowledging that I could answer truthfully without undermining their parental authority. "I had some important things to work out with your mom and dad," I said carefully. "Grown-up things that weren't about you at all. I always wanted to see you, Noah." That never changed for a single minute. He considered this, his brow furrowed in the way it always did when he was processing complex information. "So you weren't mad at me?" "Never," I assured him firmly. "Not even a little bit." He relaxed visibly, snuggling closer. "Good, because I made you lots of stuff at school, and Mom said we could bring it next time if today goes okay." I looked up at Olivia again, surprised by this gesture of potential ongoing contact. Her expression was guarded but not hostile. "I'll pick him up at 6, she said, her voice carefully neutral. "He's had lunch, but he'll probably want a snack around 3. No sugar if you can help it. It makes his bedtime difficult." I nodded, grateful for the practical information and what it represented, a willingness to work together. However, tentatively for Noah's benefit, "We'll have a wonderful time." I assured her, "Thank you for bringing him." She hesitated, then added, "He really has missed you, Mom. He asks about you almost every day." The acknowledgement of our bond, simple as it was, felt like the first tentative step towards some new understanding between us. Not forgiveness. Not yet. There was too much unresolved hurt, too many consequences still unfolding from their actions, but perhaps a recognition that the ties between us couldn't be severed completely, shouldn't be severed despite the breach of trust. After she left, Noah and I spent a joyful day exploring the hotel's amenities in the nearby waterfront park. He chattered continuously, bringing me up to date on his school projects, his friends, the new karate class he had started. He mentioned nothing about the family's financial situation or any tensions at home, though I noticed he didn't speak much about Ethan, except in passing. It was only as the day was ending, as we sat on a bench sharing an ice cream cone, a small rebellion against Olivia's no-sugar directive, that he asked the question I had been dreading. "Grandma, are you and Mom fighting? Because of money?" I nearly choked on my bite of ice cream. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" He shrugged, suddenly fascinated by a seagull hopping nearby. "I heard Dad saying you were being greedy and selfish about money, and Mom was crying and saying they never should have taken it without asking. Are you mad because they took your money?" The innocent question, and the revelation that he had overheard far more than any child should about adult financial conflicts, left me momentarily speechless. I wanted to be honest without burdening him with complex issues beyond his understanding, without portraying his parents in a negative light, despite my own feelings about their actions. "Your mom and dad and I had a disagreement about some financial matters," I said carefully. "It's complicated, like a lot of grown-up things, but we're working it out." "But are you mad at them?" he persisted. I considered my answer carefully. I was hurt by some choices they made, I admitted. And yes, I was angry too, but mostly I was sad that we weren't being honest with each other. Honest communication is really important in families, don't you think? He nodded solemnly. "Like when I broke the vase and said it was the cat, but then I felt bad and told Mom the truth, exactly like that," I agreed, suppressing a smile at the comparison. "Sometimes it's hard to tell the truth, especially when we've made mistakes, but it's always better." In the end, he leaned against me, his small body warm against my side. "I think Mom's really sorry," he said quietly. "She cries sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep." The image of Olivia crying alone at night sent an unexpected pang through my heart. Despite everything, she was still my daughter, and the thought of her suffering brought me no satisfaction. The complexity of my emotions, anger at the betrayal, hurt at the manipulation. When I broke the vase and said it was the cat, but then I felt bad and told Mom the truth, exactly like that, I agreed, suppressing a smile at the comparison. "Sometimes it's hard to tell the truth, especially when we've made mistakes, but it's always better." In the end, he leaned against me, his small body warm against my side. "I think Mom's really sorry," he said quietly. "She cries sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep." The image of Olivia crying alone at night sent an unexpected pang through my heart. Despite everything, she was still my daughter, and the thought of her suffering brought me no satisfaction. The complexity of my emotions, anger at the betrayal, hurt at the manipulation, yet persistent maternal concern for her well-being was exhausting. Growing up is hard. I told Noah as much for my own benefit as for his. Even for grown-ups, we keep learning and making mistakes, and hopefully doing better next time. He seemed satisfied with this answer, moving on to tell me about the class turtle, in his turn to take it home for the weekend. But his question lingered in my mind long after Olivia came to collect him. Long after I returned to my quiet hotel room, alone that night, I sat on the balcony of my room, watching lights shimmer on the harbor water, listening to distant music from a restaurant below. For the first time since discovering the theft, I allowed myself to consider a future in which reconciliation might be possible. Not a return to the old pattern, certainly, but perhaps something new and healthier. A relationship built on mutual respect rather than financial dependency, boundaries that were clear but not impenetrable. The path forward wasn't clear, and the hurt was still too raw for easy forgiveness. But Noah's innocent observations had reminded me of something essential beneath the betrayal and the legal proceedings and the financial settlements. We were still family, flawed, complicated, sometimes hurtful to each other, but connected by bonds that couldn't simply be dissolved with a cease and desist letter. I took out my phone and after a moment's hesitation sent a text to Olivia. "Thank you for today. Noah is such a wonderful boy, thoughtful, observant, kind. You're raising him well despite challenging circumstances. I'd like to do this again soon." Her response came minutes later. "He had a great time. Talked about you non-stop all evening. We can arrange another visit whenever you'd like." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an acknowledgement of the harm done, but it was communication not filtered through attorneys, focused on the one thing we both valued above all else: Noah's well-being and happiness. And for now, perhaps that was enough to build upon one careful step at a time. As I prepared for bed in the unfamiliar hotel room, I found myself thinking about the garden I had planted back home in Colorado. How some perennials appeared dead after winter's harsh treatment, but with patience and care, would eventually push new growth through the soil. Relationships could be like that too. I reflected, dormant, but not dead, damaged, but not destroyed, capable of renewal if given the right conditions and sufficient time. The next morning, I woke feeling lighter than I had in months, not because the situation was resolved, far from it, but because I had allowed myself to envision a potential future beyond the current conflict. The financial settlement would proceed. As agreed, the legal boundaries would remain firmly in place, but alongside those necessary structures, perhaps we could begin building something new from the rubble of what had been broken. I packed my suitcase methodically, preparing for the flight back to Colorado later that day. As I folded my clothes, I found myself mentally planning the summer garden, where I would plant the new rose bushes. I'd ordered whether the experimental heirloom tomatoes would thrive in the western corner. Simple plans for my own life, independent of Olivia and Ethan's needs or expectations. Not a rejection of my role as mother and grandmother, but an expansion beyond those identities. For so long, I had defined myself primarily through what I gave to others: support, money, time, care. Now, I was learning in my 7th decade to balance that generosity with self-protection, to recognize that my worth wasn't measured by my usefulness to my family, to understand that true love sometimes required saying no, establishing consequences, demanding respect. It wasn't the retirement I had envisioned: peaceful, uncomplicated, free from conflict. But perhaps it was the one I needed: challenging, clarifying, ultimately liberating. A retirement, not just from work, but from outdated patterns and harmful dynamics. A retirement into a new understanding of what family could mean when built on honesty rather than exploitation. I closed my suitcase, took one last look at the harbor view, and headed downstairs to check out whatever came next. I would face it with clear eyes and firm boundaries, not in anger, but in the hard-won wisdom that sometimes love requires courage more than sacrifice. The settlement payments continued arriving with mechanical regularity, each one representing another small piece of justice. 6 months into our agreement, I had received just over $20,000. A significant sum, though still less than a third of what had been taken. Each check arrived in a plain envelope, with no personal note, no acknowledgement beyond the cold financial transaction. I dutifully documented each payment in my ledger before depositing it, watching my retirement account slowly rebuild. My visits with Noah had settled into a comfortable pattern: one weekend each month in San Diego, usually at neutral locations like the hotel near the harbor, or occasionally at public parks and museums. Olivia would drop him off and pick him up with minimal interaction, polite but distant, as if we were acquaintances rather than mother and daughter. We never discussed the ongoing repayments or the circumstances that had led to our estrangement. Those topics remained firmly in the realm of legal correspondence, handled through Caroline's office. It was a fragile equilibrium, but it allowed me to maintain my relationship with Noah while enforcing the boundaries I had established. He seemed to adapt to the new arrangement with the resilience children often display. accepting without question that Grandma now had special no-aha time rather than family visits. If he noticed the tension between his mother and me, he rarely mentioned it, focusing instead on sharing his latest school projects or showing off new karate moves. Life in Colorado continued with its quiet rhythm. I expanded my volunteer work at the community center, taking on a leadership role in their adult literacy program. My garden thrived under attentive care, the summer yielding bumper crops of tomatoes and peppers that I shared with neighbors and preserved for winter. I joined a hiking group for seniors, discovering muscles I hadn't used in decades in vistas. That took my breath away gradually. Tentatively, I was building a life centered around my own interests and connections, rather than revolving exclusively around Olivia's family. It wasn't the life I had envisioned for my retirement years, but it held its own satisfactions, deeper friendships, newfound competencies, the quiet pride of self-sufficiency. The settled pattern shattered on an ordinary Tuesday in September, with a phone call that sent me rushing to the airport on the first available flight to San Diego. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Melissa Jenkins from Torrey Pines Elementary. I'm Noah's teacher." The voice on the phone was professional but concerned. "There's been an incident at school involving Noah. He's physically fine, but he's quite upset, and we haven't been able to reach his parents." My heart rate accelerated immediately. "What kind of incident is he hurt?" No, nothing like that," she assured me quickly. "Noah had what appeared to be an anxiety attack during math class. He became very distressed, had trouble breathing, and was crying uncontrollably. Our school counselor has been with him, but he's asking for you specifically, for me." I was already reaching for my purse, mental calculations about flight times running through my head. "Have you tried both his parents? His mother should be reachable." There was a slight hesitation before the teacher continued. "We've been trying all the emergency contacts. Mr. Parker's phone goes straight to voicemail." Mrs. Parker answered initially, but said she was in Los Angeles at a design consultation and couldn't get back until evening. She said to try you. The information landed like a stone in my stomach. Olivia was passing responsibility back for a school emergency to me, which might have made sense if I lived locally, but she knew perfectly well. I was in Colorado, hundreds of miles away. Where was Ethan? Why weren't either of them dropping everything to reach their distressed child? "I'll be there as soon as I can," I told the teacher, already pulling up flight information on my tablet. "Please tell Noah his grandma is coming. It may take several hours, but I'm on my way." I secured a seat on a flight, leaving in 90 minutes, threw essential items into an overnight bag, and called a rideshare service to rush me to the airport. As I waited anxiously at the gate, I tried Olivia's cell phone, repeatedly growing, increasingly frustrated when each call went unanswered. Finally, I sent a TSE text on my way to San Diego school, called about Noah having anxiety attack. "Where are you?" Her response came just as I was boarding in LA with important client, "Can't leave. Thank you for handling this. We'll be back tonight." The dismissive brevity of her message, the apparent prioritization of a client meeting over her son's emotional crisis, fueled a slow-burning anger that stayed with me throughout the flight. What had happened to the dedicated mother who once fretted over every sniffle who had chosen teaching? Partly because the schedule aligned with Noah's school hours, Wen had career ambitions. Perhaps the lifestyle they supported begun to outweigh parental responsibilities. By the time I arrived at Torrey Pines Elementary School, hours were long over, but the teacher had promised to wait with Noah in the after-school program. I found them in a cheerful classroom, decorated with student artwork. Noah curled in a beanbag chair with a book, while Ms. Jenkins worked quietly at her desk. His face when he spotted me, the instant transformation from withdrawn misery to explosive relief, nearly broke my heart. "Grandma!" he cried, launching himself into my arms with such force. I staggered slightly. "You came. You really came." "Of course I came, sweetheart," I murmured into his hair, holding him tightly. "I'll always come when you need me." Ms. Jenkins approached with a sympathetic smile. He's been much calmer since knowing you were on your way. The counselor thinks the anxiety attack might have been triggered by some discussions about family finances that he's been overhearing at home. I stiffened slightly, but kept my expression neutral. I see. Has he talked about what specifically upset him? She lowered her voice. He mentioned being worried about his parents fighting over money, about possibly losing their house. He said his dad has been super angry lately, and his mom cries a lot. The information settled like a weight on my shoulders. I had been so focused on recovering what was rightfully mine, on setting boundaries and enforcing consequences, that I hadn't fully considered how the situation might be affecting Noah. The legal settlement was putting financial pressure on Olivia and Ethan, exactly as intended. That pressure was clearly spilling over onto my innocent grandson. I thanked the teacher for her care and signed the necessary forms to take Noah with me. As we walked to the rideshare vehicle I had waiting, he held my hand with unusual tightness, as if afraid I might disappear. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. "Are we going to your hotel?" I hesitated. I had booked a last-minute room at our usual meeting place, assuming we would stay there overnight. But his question carried an undertone of unease about returning home that concerned me. "Would you like to go to the hotel?" I asked carefully, "or would you prefer to go to your house?" He looked down at his sneakers. "The hotel, please. It's quiet there, and they have those little soaps shaped like seashells." I nodded, not pressing further for the moment. "Hotel it is. We can order room service for dinner. Maybe those chocolate chip pancakes you like that." Earned a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. During the ride, he leaned against me heavily, uncharacteristically quiet. I stroked his hair and maintained a gentle stream of conversation about neutral topics, the interesting cloud formations, a dog we saw skateboarding with its owner, the new exhibit at the Natural History Museum we might visit. He responded with nods or single-word answers, his usual exuberance noticeably dimmed at the hotel. I sent another text to Olivia informing her of our location and asking her to call me as soon as possible. Then I focused entirely on Noah, drawing him a bubble bath with the scented hotel toiletries, ordering his favorite comfort foods from room service, and creating a nest of pillows on the bed where we could watch nature documentaries. His preferred viewing since toddlerhood. It wasn't until he was fed, bathed, and settled comfortably against me, half watching penguins waddle across Antarctic ice, that I gently broached the subject of what had happened at school. "Ms. Jenkins mentioned you had a rough day today," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Do you want to talk about what upset you?" He tensed slightly against me, but didn't pull away. I got scared during math. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't breathe. "Right. Ms. Jenkins said it was an anxiety attack. That sounds frightening. Do you know what made you feel that way?" He was quiet for so long, I thought he might not answer. Then in a rush, I heard Dad saying we might lose the house because of the payments to you. He said we're underwater on the mortgage, whatever that means. And the boat already got sold, and it's all because you're being selfish about your money. His voice cracked. On the last words, "Are we going to be homeless, Grandma? Is it because of the money thing between you and Mom and Dad?" The direct question, the raw fear behind it, hit me with physical force. This was exactly what I had dreaded. Noah caught in the crossfire of adult financial conflicts, bearing emotional burdens that no child should carry. I chose my words with extreme care. "No, sweetheart, you're not going to be homeless. Your parents are dealing with some financial challenges right now, but they'll worry us through them. And it's not your job to worry about adult money problems." But Dad said adults sometimes say things when they're stressed or upset that they shouldn't say, especially where children can hear them. I kept my voice gentle, not wanting to criticize his father outright, despite my fury that Ethan would be so careless with his words around his son. "The important thing for you to know is that everyone in your family, your mom, your dad, and me, loves you very much. The grown-up issues between us don't change that." He seemed to consider this, absently tracing patterns on the hotel bedspread. Dad shouts a lot now at Mom mostly, but sometimes at me. If I ask for stuff like new shoes for soccer or field trip money, each revelation pierced me with fresh guilt and concern. The settlement I had demanded, just and necessary as it was creating ripple effects I hadn't fully anticipated. Ethan's anger, likely exacerbated by financial pressure, was poisoning their home environment. Noah was absorbing tension and fear that would shape his relationship with money, security, and family for years to come. Yet, what was the alternative? Forgiving the theft, allowing the exploitation to continue unchecked. Wouldn't that teach Noah equally harmful lessons about boundaries, respect, and consequences? I pulled him closer, resting my chin atop his head. I'm sorry. Things have been difficult at home. That must be very hard for you. It's okay. He shrugged with forced casualness. I just stay in my room a lot with my headphones on or go to Maddox's house after school. His mom always has good snacks. The image of him hiding in his room, using headphones to block out parental arguments, made my heart ache before I could respond. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Olivia, finally. That's your mom. I told Noah I need to talk to her for a few minutes. Why don't you pick another show to watch? I stepped onto the hotel room's small balcony to take the call, sliding the door, partially closed for privacy, while keeping Noah in my sight. How is he? Olivia's voice was tense, defensive, physically fine, but emotionally distressed. I replied, keeping my tone neutral despite my simmering anger. He's been hearing arguments about financial problems, about possibly losing the house, about the payments to me being the cause. She exhaled sharply. Ethan shouldn't have said those things where Noah could hear. I've told him repeatedly to keep those discussions private. But are they true? I pressed. Are you at risk of losing your home? A long pause followed. Things are tight, she finally admitted. The housing market dropped, so we're underwater on the mortgage, owing more than the current value. Ethan's company did a round of layoffs, and while he kept his job, his bonus structure changed significantly. And yes, the monthly payments to you are stretching us to the breaking point. I leaned against the balcony railing, absorbing this information. It was the first glimpse I'd had into their financial reality since the settlement began. Why didn't you say something? The agreement allows for renegotiation in cases of significant financial hardship. Renegotiation requires full financial disclosure, she pointed out bitterly. Ethan refused to open our books to scrutiny again. His pride couldn't take it. His pride is more important than Noah's emotional well-being, than your housing stability. Don't lecture me about priorities, Mom. Her voice sharpened. You are the one who insisted on the aggressive repayment schedule in the first place. I bit back a retort about who had created the necessity for repayment at all. Recriminations wouldn't help. Noah, where are you now? When will you be back? I'm just leaving. LA traffic is horrible. Probably another 2 hours at least. She hesitated. Can Noah stay with you tonight? I know it's asking a lot. It might be better than bringing him home to the current situation. The implication was clear. Ethan was in one of his rages, and home wasn't a safe or comfortable place for Noah right now. Of course, he can stay with me, I said immediately. But Olivia, this can't continue. Noah is having anxiety attacks at school. He's hiding in his room, with headphones to block out fighting. This environment is harming him. Don't you think I know that? Her voice cracked slightly. I'm doing the best I can trying to build a design business to supplement our income, shielding Noah as much as possible, mediating between Ethan's anger and everything else. For the first time since our estrangement began, I heard genuine distress in my daughter's voice. Not manipulation, not defensive anger, but real anguish. The realization softened something in me, a hard kernel of righteousness that had sustained my resolve through months of legal proceedings and emotional distance. We need to talk, I said, my tone gentler. Really talk, not through lawyers, about Noah, about the settlement, about finding a way forward that doesn't destroy everything in the process. She was quiet for so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. Okay, she finally said, sounding exhausted. But not tonight. I need to deal with Ethan first. Make sure he's calmer tomorrow. Then breakfast at the hotel restaurant. 9 o'clock a.m. Noah can swim in the pool while we talk. I'll be there, she promised before ending the call. I stood on the balcony for several minutes afterward, watching the twilight deepen over the harbor, boats returning to their moorings as darkness fell. The situation was more complicated than I had allowed myself to acknowledge. My justified anger at the theft had perhaps blinded me to the complex human reality behind it. A family under financial pressure, a marriage strained by materialism, and poor choices, a child caught in currents he couldn't possibly navigate. When I returned inside, Noah had fallen asleep, curled around a hotel pillow with the television still playing quietly. I gently removed his glasses, pulled the blanket over him, and sat in the armchair nearby, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. The anger I had been nurturing for months, righteous and justified as it was, began to shift, not diminishing, but transforming into something more nuanced. What mattered now wasn't punishment or restitution, finding a path forward that would protect this sleeping child from further emotional harm. I sent a carefully worded email to Caroline, outlining what I had learned and suggesting we explore modifications to the settlement agreement that would address the current financial reality without abandoning the principle of full repayment. Then I switched off my phone, kicked off my shoes, and settled into the armchair for what promised to be a long night of reflection and uneasy sleep. Morning arrived with soft coastal light filtering through the curtains. Noah was still deeply asleep, one arm flung dramatically across his face, in a posture so reminiscent of Olivia as a child that it made my heart twist with a complicated mixture of love and grief. I ordered room service breakfast enough for both of us with extra pancakes for him, and sat by the window with a cup of coffee, mentally preparing for the conversation ahead. Noah, woke as the food arrived, immediately perking up at the sight of chocolate chip pancakes and whipped cream. "Are we having a hotel party?" he asked, the previous day's distress momentarily forgotten in the childish delight of breakfast in bed. "Something like that." I smiled, helping him arrange pillows into a backrest. "Your mom is coming to join us a little later. We're going to talk about some things while you swim in the pool, if that sounds good to you." He paused, a fork full of pancake halfway to his mouth. "Talk about what?" "About how to make things better for everyone," I said simply, "about the money situation, and about making sure you don't have to worry about grown-up problems anymore." He nodded solemnly. "Are you going to stop making mom and dad pay you back?" The direct question caught me off guard. "We're going to figure out a solution that works for everyone," I said, not quite answering directly. "The most important thing is making sure you feel safe and happy." He seemed satisfied with this response, returning his attention to the pancakes with the single-minded focus children can bring to foods they love. I watched him eat, making mental notes of small changes since my last visit. A new freckle across the bridge of his nose, slightly longer limbs, a few missing baby teeth. He was growing so quickly, these early years, precious and fleeting years that should be marked by security and joy, not financial anxiety and parental conflict. Olivia arrived precisely at 9, looking exhausted but composed. She had made an effort with her appearance, hair neatly styled, casual but professional outfit, but couldn't hide the shadows under her eyes or the tension in her posture. She brightened visibly when Noah ran to hug her, lifting him despite his growing size and holding him tightly. "I missed you, Pumpkin," she murmured, pressing her face into his hair. "Did you have a good night with Grandma?" He nodded enthusiastically. "We had pancakes for breakfast, and Grandma said, I can swim while you guys talk about money stuff." Olivia's eyes met mine over his head, a flash of silent communication passing between us, acknowledgement of the directness of children, the impossibility of hiding difficult truths from observant young minds. "That sounds perfect," she told him. "I packed your swim trunks and a change of clothes. Why don't you go put them on, and then we'll all head down to the pool." Once Noah was settled with a hotel lifeguard, supervising the children's pool area, Olivia and I took a table at the outdoor cafe overlooking the water. A server brought coffee, then retreated, leaving us in an uncomfortable silence that stretched between us like a physical presence. How bad is it really? I finally asked the financial situation. She stared into her coffee cup as if it might contain answers. Bad enough. We're 4 months behind on the mortgage. Ethan's car was repossessed last week. He's been using ride services to get to work, which is another expense we can't afford. Credit cards are maxed out. She paused, then added quietly, I've been selling my jewelry piece by piece, just to cover groceries and Noah's school expenses. I absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the lavish lifestyle they had been maintaining just months ago. What happened to all the investments? The timeshare in Cabo? The stock options? The market crashed. The timeshare got sold at a loss. Ethan's stock options became nearly worthless when the company restructured. She finally looked up at me, her expression a mixture of defiance and defeat. I know what you're thinking, that we brought this on ourselves with poor decisions and excessive spending. You're not wrong, but knowing that doesn't make the current reality any easier to navigate. And Ethan's response to all this has been, I let the question hang already. Knowing the answer from Noah's comments and her own reluctance to bring him home last night. Rage, blame, drinking more than he should. She shredded a paper napkin into tiny pieces, her fingers restless. He blames me for not earning enough with my design work. He blames you for bleeding us dry with the settlement payments. He blames his company executives, the economy, everything. And everyone except himself and Noah is witnessing all of this. I try to shield him. She insisted. I send him to friends' houses when I can. I intervene when Ethan starts getting too loud. But it's not enough. Not because it didn't matter, it did. But because moving forward matters more than staying locked in the past, because Noah deserves better from all of us. She nodded slowly, a fragile hope, replacing some of the despair in her expression. Thank you for coming yesterday when the school called, for being here, for Noah, for Rome, being willing to reconsider things. I'll always come when Noah needs me, I said simply, and I'll always be your mother, Olivia, even when I'm angry or disappointed, or establishing necessary boundaries. That doesn't change. We spent the next hour outlining a new approach, practical steps for addressing the immediate financial crisis, parameters for renegotiated settlement, strategies for creating a more stable environment for Noah. It wasn't a perfect solution. It didn't erase the breach of trust or magically solve the complex problems they faced, but it was a beginning, a tentative bridge being rebuilt between us. As we talked, I found myself watching Noah through the glass partition of the pool area, his uninhibited joy as he played, the natural resilience of childhood, evident in his recovery from yesterday's distress. Children need consistency, security, love. But they also need to see the adults in their lives, modeling healthy conflict resolution, authentic communication, the hard work of repairing damaged relationships, perhaps in our painful, complicated journey. Olivia's mind, even Ethan's if he was willing, there was an opportunity to teach Noah something valuable. After all, not that families are perfect, but that they can heal. Not that trust, once broken, is gone forever, but that it can be rebuilt with patience and genuine effort. Not that forgiveness erases consequences, but that it opens doors to new possibilities. As he waved enthusiastically from the pool, I waved back, feeling something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but its precursor. The willingness to imagine a future beyond the hurt. The recognition that justice without compassion risked becoming another form of selfishness. The understanding that the most important assets in life weren't financial at all, but the human connections that gave it meaning. He looks happy, Olivia observed, following my gaze to her son. Yes, I agreed. Let's do everything we can to keep him that way. We had a long road ahead, difficult conversations with Ethan, complex legal modifications to the settlement, the slow reconstruction of trust between mother and daughter. But watching Noah splash joyfully in the sunlight, I felt something I hadn't experienced in many months. Hope, not the desperate hope that clings to illusions, but the grounded hope that acknowledges difficulties while believing in the possibility of something better. It wasn't the resolution I had imagined when I first discovered the theft. Neat, conclusive, righteously satisfying. It was messier, more complicated, requiring ongoing effort rather than a single moment of vindication. But it was real, alive with potential, nourished by the love we all shared for the boy in the pool, who deserved our best selves, even when those selves were works in progress. Spring came to Colorado, with its usual drama: snowstorms, one day warm sunshine, the next crocuses pushing defiantly through lingering patches of white. My garden waited patiently for attention. Soil still too cold for planting, but promising in its potential. I knelt beside the raised beds I'd built last autumn, turning the dark earth with gloved hands, mentally mapping where each variety would go. The physical labor felt good, grounding a tangible connection to cycles of growth and renewal. 6 months had passed since Noah's anxiety attack and the watershed conversation with Olivia by the hotel pool. 6 months of careful rebuilding, not just of financial arrangements, but of trust, communication, and mutual respect. The modified settlement agreement that Caroline had drafted acknowledged the changed circumstances while maintaining the principle of full repayment, extending the timeline, but not erasing the obligation. Olivia had embraced the financial counseling requirement with unexpected enthusiasm, telling me during one of our newly established weekly phone calls that it felt liberating to finally confront the reality of their situation rather than maintaining appearances. She had taken a full-time position teaching art at a private school, providing stable income and benefits, while she built her design business on the side. Ethan's journey had been more turbulent. His initial resistance to the financial disclosures and counseling had nearly derailed the entire arrangement. Only when faced with Olivia's ultimatum, get help or she and Noah would move out, did he reluctantly agree to participate. The counseling revealed deeper issues beneath his financial recklessness: childhood insecurities about status, unprocessed grief over his father's bankruptcy. Years earlier, the intoxicating but hollow validation of appearing successful. He attended anger management sessions now. While progress was uneven, Noah reported fewer shouting episodes at home. They had downsized to a modest apartment, closer to Noah's school, sold most of their luxury possessions, and begun the long process of rebuilding their credit. The timeshare was gone, as were the country club memberships and expensive cars in their place, with something less photogenic but more valuable: solvency, transparency, a growing sense of authentic contentment. As for my relationship with them, it remained a work in progress. Trust, once shattered, couldn't be restored overnight, but small steps accumulated: regular video calls where we discussed Noah's activities, but also shared genuinely about our own lives. Olivia asking for my advice about classroom management strategies, respecting my expertise as a former educator. Ethan sending a handwritten note with one of the settlement payments, acknowledging the harm done and expressing gratitude for the second chance. I was careful not to romanticize the progress or expect too much too soon. Caroline had cautioned me against lowering my guard completely, and I maintained clear boundaries, financial and emotional. Even as bridges were being rebuilt, the settlement payments continued, smaller but consistent, each one representing both restitution for past wrongs and investment in future honesty. Noah visited me in Colorado during his spring break, his first time seeing my home since the estrangement began. I watched him explore my garden with curiosity, help me prepare simple meals in my kitchen, set up the tent in the backyard where he insisted on sleeping. Despite the chilly nights, his resilience amazed me: how children can adapt, heal, find joy. Even after difficult experiences, the anxiety attacks had diminished with therapy and a more stable home environment. Though he still occasionally asked for reassurance, that the family's financial situation was secure. "I like your house, Grandma," he told me on his last evening as we sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "It's cozy, not fancy like our old house, but better, somehow better." How I asked, curious about his perception. He considered the question with endearing seriousness. "It feels real, like it matches you." He struggled to articulate the concept. "Our old house was like wearing someone else's clothes. They might look nice, but they don't fit right out of the mouths of babes." Indeed, his simple observation captured something profound about authenticity, about aligning external circumstances with internal values, a lesson his parents were learning through painful experience. "That's very insightful, Noah." I told him homes should feel like they fit the people who live in them. He nodded, pleased with my approval. "Mom says our new apartment is temporary, but I like it better too. Dad doesn't have to work so late, and we eat dinner together almost every night now." These glimpses into their reconstructed daily life reassured me that the crisis, painful as it had been, had catalyzed necessary changes, not just financial restructuring, but a fundamental reassessment of priorities and values. The theft had been inexcusable, the breach of trust devastating, but the transformation that followed might ultimately lead to healthier lives for all of them, especially Noah. After he returned to San Diego, I found myself reflecting on the complex journey of the past 18 months, the discovery, the confrontation, the legal proceedings, the tentative reconciliation. None of it had followed the script I might have imagined when I first saw those unauthorized withdrawals from my accounts. Reality rarely conforms to our mental narratives, especially where family is concerned. I had been entitled to my anger. The theft was real, substantial, a violation of trust that required accountability. But I had come to understand that justice without compassion risked becoming its own form of self-righteousness, that establishing boundaries was necessary, but building bridges was equally important, that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or enabling, but rather creating space for genuine change. On a cool April morning, I received an unexpected package from San Diego. Inside was a clay sculpture, clearly made by Noah's improving artistic skills. A figure of a woman kneeling in a garden, surrounded by tiny flowers and vegetables, formed with painstaking detail. A small card accompanied it, written in Olivia's familiar handwriting. "Mom, Noah made this in art class and insisted we send it immediately. He said it shows you in your happy place." I was struck by how carefully he observed and remembered the details of your garden during his visit. It made me realize how much I've missed, really seeing you these past years, not as a resource or support system, but as a person with your own joys, interests, and needs. I'm sorry for how long it took me to understand that we're still finding our way. I wanted you to know that I'm grateful for this second chance, for your boundaries that forced us to confront reality, for your ongoing love. Despite everything Noah asked me recently, what wisdom is, I told him it's learning from mistakes and making better choices going forward. He said, like grandma with the money thing, out of the mouths of babes, right? With love and continuing gratitude, Olivia. I placed the sculpture on my windowsill, where morning light would catch its simple, earnest beauty. The note I tucked into my journal, a tangible reminder of the complicated path we were navigating. Not returning to what was, but creating something new, something wiser, something with space for both accountability and grace. That evening, as twilight settled over the garden, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, watching birds settle into the trees for the night. The retirement I was living wasn't the one I had envisioned years ago, with carefree visits to my daughter's family and uncomplicated relationships. But perhaps it was richer in its complexity, more meaningful for having been tested and reconsidered, more authentically mine, for having required me to define and defend its boundaries. I had learned in my 7th decade that family love isn't always instinctive or easy. Sometimes it requires difficult conversations, painful reckonings, the courage to say no, even when saying yes would be simpler. That true generosity includes giving people the opportunity to recognize and repair their mistakes, not just shielding them from consequences. That retirement funds matter, but so do the intangible assets of dignity, self-respect, and honest relationships. Noah's sculpture caught the last rays of sunlight. The clay figure's face turned toward the miniature garden with an expression of peaceful contentment. There was wisdom in that simple image, the recognition that joy comes not from grand gestures or expensive possessions, but from authentic connection to what truly matters. From tending the gardens that nourish us literally and figuratively, from the patient work of growth, season after season. The path ahead would have its challenges. Trust would continue to be rebuilt, situation by situation. The settlement would eventually be paid in full, closing one chapter, but opening questions about what came next. Ethan's progress would likely include backsliding alongside growth. Noah would face his own challenges as he navigated adolescence and eventual adulthood, shaped but not defined by the family dynamics he had witnessed. But sitting there in the gathering darkness, I felt an unexpected sense of peace with the uncertainty. Life didn't offer neat resolutions or perfect endings. It offered opportunities to learn to grow, to practice forgiveness without forgetting to hold people accountable, while still holding space for their humanity. My retirement savings had been depleted, then partially restored, but my retirement wisdom had only grown, teaching me that worth isn't measured in dollars, that boundaries can be acts of love, that sometimes the most valuable inheritance we leave isn't financial at all, but the example of living with integrity, courage, and an open heart, even when that heart has been wounded. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, I thought about Noah's observation, that my home felt real, that it matched me. Perhaps that was the truest measure of a life well lived, not its grandeur or perfection, but its authenticity, its alignment between inner values and outer choices. It's courage to be real, even when reality includes difficult truths and imperfect reconciliations. I had protected my financial assets as best I could, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my most valuable asset of all, the dignity of being seen and respected as a complete person, not merely a resource to be utilized. In doing so, I had offered Olivia the opportunity to see herself more clearly as well, to recognize patterns, make different choices, become the mother and woman she truly wanted to be, rather than the one circumstances had shaped. The settlement would eventually be paid in full, but the true resolution wasn't financial. It was the gradual restoration of mutual respect, the growing capacity for honest communication, the shared commitment to creating a healthier future. For Noah, the most valuable repayment wasn't measured in dollars, but in authentic connection, in the tentative rebuilding of trust, one conversation, one visit, one small gesture at a time. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.